Paris, winter, 1392. The somber walls of the Louvre tremble in the wind, but in the heart of France, the tremor comes not from cold. On the throne sits a man whose gaze flickers, sometimes empty, sometimes blazing with madness. Charles VI, once a king who promised France a golden age, now recoils from even the lightest touch. He is convinced his body is made of glass, and any contact will shatter him into pieces. Yet this strange belief is only part of the horror hidden beneath the crown. It was whispered that at night he slept beside corpses. At first, the bodies of dead courtiers, then of decaying animals, and finally, monks whose remains were stolen from monasteries. In these silent, cold companions he found strange comfort, as if the dead alone could not harm him. This became his secret weakness, whispered about in the corridors of the palace. The world still remembered Charles as young, slender, resolute, with a clear gaze, confident in his right to rule. At 11 years old, he had ascended the throne after the death of his father, Charles V. His coronation unfolded in the splendor of gold and promises, and the people hailed him as a savior. But behind the glittering halls, France was already rotting war with England. Feudal uprisings, court intrigues. Everything changed in August of 1392. On a military campaign against the traitor Olivier de Clisson, the king suddenly fell into madness. He turned on his own knights, cutting several down where they stood, before trembling in his saddle and staring blankly into nothing. From that day on, voices, fears, and nightmares took root in his mind. At first, courtiers explained it as fatigue or sorcery, but the attacks returned. And with each one, Charles drifted further from reality. He no longer recognized his wife, his children, even his own brothers. At times he would go weeks without washing, until his skin reeked and his hair clotted into filthy ropes. At other times, he would sit motionless for hours, staring at his reflection, terrified of moving lest he crack. But what horrified his court most was his strange obsession with death. He wandered crypts, stroking marble tombs, and once commanded that the body of a dead monk be brought into his chambers, claiming it would guard his soul as he slept. Servants who carried this ghastly burden trembled, but none dared disobey. Rumors spread among the people. The king was cursed. Some blamed the intrigues of the Duke of Orleans, others the sins of his family. Still others whispered that during a hunting trip, Charles had encountered the devil in human form. Whatever the truth, an age of fear had begun. The deeper the king sank into madness, the more power slipped into the hands of those who exploited his fears, but who truly ruled France while her king slept beside corpses. With each passing year, Charles VI's court became a pilgrimage ground for madmen and outcasts. Fanatical monks, alchemists with murky elixirs, wandering prophets with bizarre rituals, they all crowded into the palace. This only deepened the atmosphere of decay. Charles appeared less and less at councils, ceding authority to his uncle, the Duke of Burgundy, and his brother, the Duke of Orleans. The two men feuded openly, using the king's madness as cover for their rivalries. Paris seethed with intrigue. The Duke of Burgundy, nicknamed the Fearless, sold offices and built armies, while Orleans drowned himself in luxury, taxing the people heavily to fund his pleasures. Meanwhile, Charles spent his days in darkened chambers, draped in black cloth and lit by candles, issuing strange commands. He demanded that dead courtiers not be buried until he had personally bid them farewell. Sometimes these farewells lasted days. Servants whispered how he stroked their cold hands, murmured their names, and fell asleep beside them, as if a corpse were his only source of peace. The whispers spread beyond the Louvre's walls. People said the king slept in death's embrace, and that it cursed France. In the streets, drawings appeared of Charles surrounded by skeletons, drinking wine from a skull. The dukes tried to tighten control, But the harsher the measures, the deeper grew the people's hatred. France was crumbling from within. England renewed its offensives in the 100 Years' War. Nobles openly rebelled. Peasants looted caravans, refusing to pay taxes to a king of the dead. Court physicians tried everything: bloodletting, incense fumigations, exotic salves, but his illness only deepened. In winter 1405, horror reached its height. Charles ordered 7 dead children from an orphanage to be carried into his chambers, insisting they would warm his heart. It was too much, even for hardened courtiers, but no one dared object. The king's power was symbolic, but behind the symbol lurked far greater monsters, those who used his madness to rule. Soon came the night that would pass into history, the Ball of the Burning Men, Paris, January 1393. Outside, frost and mist gripped the city. Inside the palace, everything blazed. It was the wedding of one of Queen Isabeau's ladies in waiting. The smell of roasted meat, the aroma of wine and wax, the glow of hundreds of candles reflected in golden tapestries. In the great hall, music from flutes and lutes mingled with voices. Charles, unusually spirited that night, demanded a masquerade. He loved entertainments that surprised or terrified. The idea, a dance of the wild men. 6 men, including the king himself, would don costumes smeared with resin and covered in hemp fibers to resemble rough, beastly fur. The smell of resin was thick, sticky, clinging to clothes, to skin, to hair. Servants helped secure the costumes, careful to keep them from open flame. But in the hall, dozens of torches already burned, symbols of festivity, not threat. When the dance began, guests clapped, laughed, and whispered. In the half-light, the figures looked terrifying, shaggy silhouettes, eyes gleaming through the masks. But joy turned to horror. One night, unaware of the costume's secret, brought a torch too close. A single gust of air was enough. The fibers caught fire. The blaze was instant, explosive. Resin burned yellow and orange, licking men from head to toe. The sweet, sticky smell turned to choking smoke, mixed with screams. Fire clung to faces, melted flesh like wax. Panic tore through the hall. Guests shrieked, overturned tables, spilled wine that boiled in the flames. 4 of the 6 dancers were doomed. Their screams grew higher, roar, until they broke into guttural roars. Skin peeled, fibers smoldered, and the stench of burning flesh forced many to cover their mouths to keep from retching. Charles survived by miracle. His niece, Jeanne of Berry, threw a heavy cloak over him, smothering the fire, while servants dragged him down, beating out the embers. Silence came only after the charred bodies were carried away, but it was a dead silence, broken only by sobs and groans. The day entered history as the Ball of the Burning Men, one of the most horrific feasts in France's history. For the people, it was a symbol of divine wrath upon a sinful court. For courtiers, a warning of the fragility of royal power. For Charles, it marked a new spiral of terror. From that evening, his fear of touch worsened. He began to see danger in every gesture, as though the faintest contact might ignite him again. Servants were ordered to keep their distance. Physicians worked in gloves and long sleeves. Even his wife was admitted to him only through trusted intermediaries. At night, Charles heard the crackle of fire, though his chambers held neither torch nor hearth. He woke in cold sweat, claiming to see burning men at his bedside. By day, he would suddenly freeze, staring at nothing, then recoil violently, as if from invisible flames. The fire in his mind never went out. It smoldered, feeding his madness. The Ball of the Burning Men was a watershed. Before, his illness came and went, leaving brief windows of clarity. Now, those windows closed more often. On the throne sat a man surrounded by enemies, unable to distinguish living from dead. Meanwhile, the court fractured. The Dukes of Orleans and Burgundy turned to open conflict. The people, terrified by the tragedy, whispered of a curse upon France. Into that crack of power sprouted war. Charles, prisoner of his own mind, became a pawn in other hands. The early 15th century, France tore apart between the Orleanist and Burgundian factions. Charles appeared in public rarely. His few outings were solemn processions to the cathedral, where he staggered, muttered incoherent words, and sometimes froze, terrifying the crowd as if turned to stone. England watched the chaos and struck. Henry V landed in France and crushed the French army at Agincourt. Legends claim that on that day, Charles sat in his chambers, surrounded by animal skulls, insisting that dead whispered to him of victory. Instead, France suffered catastrophe. In 1418, Paris fell to the Burgundians. The king became a prisoner in all but name. To his eyes, though, he remained lord of the palace, guarded by his keepers. The corpses he refused to bury for weeks, sometimes months. His chambers became more mausoleum than bedroom. Visitors whispered of coffin boards propped in corners, adorned with bodies in fine clothes, some mummified, others rotting. Amidst this macabre company, Charles slept on his vast bed, one hand resting on the icy hand of another guardian. The Treaty of Troyes approached, sealing France's fate. England and Burgundy united. Charles VI signed the treaty, recognizing Henry V as heir to the French throne, disinheriting his own son, the future Charles VII. For many, it was treason. But the broken king hardly knew what he had signed. Witnesses said he was deep in his glass delusion, wearing gloves, terrified that touching the parchment would crack his fragile bones. Several times, he stopped the proceedings, gazing into nothing, as if negotiating with unseen companions. After Troyes, Charles ceased all involvement in governance. The palace grew quiet, ominous. Laughter vanished, replaced by the footsteps of physicians and the smell of incense masking the stench from the king's quarters. Death became his constant companion. He slept and woke beside corpses, changed out every few days as others changed bed linen. The people no longer saw him as king. Ballads called him the corpse on the throne. Caricatures showed him in a crown, swarmed by worms. And yet, as long as he lived, the throne remained occupied and the intrigues continued. Summer, 1422. Illness had ravaged Charles beyond recognition. His skin was ulcerated, his body wasted. He spoke little, muttering to empty space beside him, smiling at something invisible. Servants, hardened by years of madness, still shuddered when he grinned at nothing. In his final weeks, he refused food, taking only wine mixed with herbs brought by monks. One night, he ordered that the body of an unknown woman found on the banks of the Seine be placed beside him. There he spent his last hours, in death's embrace, until death itself finally came for him. On the 21st of October, 1422, Charles VI died. His death stirred no grief, only relief. France lay in ruins, half under English rule, its capital a nest of intrigue, its treasury empty. His reign became a symbol of decay and disgrace. But the legend of the Glass King, terrified of touch, sleeping with corpses, outlived him. To some, he was a victim of illness. To others, a grim warning of how one man's madness can drag down an entire kingdom. For France, he remained forever a ghost, wandering among the shadows of the Louvre,